If I was not paralyzed by Parkinson's disease, my movement's very slow now. I would probably choose to type this up and work on it a good deal. But circumstances forbid me from doing that, so I will trust my small collection of notes and do the best with my imagination's memory, with my memory. Some other time I can discuss the issue of memory and imagination. These are testimonial remarks regarding the Jews who killed Roberto Clemente and the circumstances I found myself in where they derided him and me, who they targeted for reasons that perhaps should be deciphered and understood, because the domestic situation has become its own form of forever war. Gail Burston, you will remember, I suppose, sent me the letters that were used by Yakuza murderers from Hollywood and Carnegie Mellon University and Great Britain to stylize a sort of numbers racket with the help of Brian Eno and King Crimson, whereby I was pigeonholed as someone who was neglectful in what they claim was the murder of John Lennon. Gail Burson's likeness, of course, appears throughout their art long before John Lennon pulled his Houdini. So this is trickery of a high magnitude. And these are the people who killed Roberto Clemente. They're predominantly Jews, but others provided the muscle for them. So what we recall from the letters of Gail Burson is she says, have you heard from Russell lately? Well, she also called me about Jim Croce before he died. Russell called me to announce that Roberto Clemente was gone. He disappeared in a plane bound to help the people of Nicaragua. Someone feels that I'm disrespectful of Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan said disgraceful things about the whole social movement of a dead man, JFK, who my investigation shows he murdered. I do not owe Ronald Reagan very much. They will balk at the idea that he killed Roberto Clemente, but he was furiously opposed to anyone who tried to resist Somoza. Roberto went there for the poor of Nicaragua. And of course, we know how Donald Trump feels about Maduro and other leaders of Latin America who don't want him to play Godfather kleptomaniac over their accounts. When I lived nearby the Wattenmakers, who brought all this down on me, they were Zionists and Attica State Prison psychiatrists who used me in a neurobehavioral sadistic experiment as a child. I used to go over to their house, and the father, Bernard, would say, we're going to play a game. I want you to steal the napkin from under my arm during the Seder. And Ian called his game Steal the Bacon. Well, of course, I couldn't do that, and I didn't bother straining myself to try. But Winemaker's neighbor owned a Rolls Royce, and his name was John. And when he was doing things like showing me the Venus flytrap, Ian got me to lie about my name to John. And I've always felt that this was a test in the estate factory of Highland Park of Pittsburgh. They could justify what they did to me by saying, oh, well, Jimmy lied to me when he met me. So then they get to do anything they want. I was about 9 years old. And Wademaker had me under hypnosis. He was a professional hypnotist from Attica State Prison psychiatric team. So the question of who provided the actual muscle to murder Roberto Clemente would be the Pittsburgh Dilworth School crowd and possibly Mazeroski out in Westmoreland. I say possibly because Miles Kirshner clearly was in this network of people, as was Natanya, who they wanted to get rid of everybody who wasn't them. They were mad uh, and insane people, murderers, as you can see. And the Iron Curtain that exists in media was perfectly clear by the way my attempts to get help in Warren were treated by the University of Pittsburgh. The Iron Curtain in media has been around for many years. And the man who attacked me most savagely was named Kasparowski. So they did use name indexes. Ronnie and Casper, like Reagan and Weinberger. Ronnie Zuzinski attacked me. So the muscle mate was provided by the mafia and Yoko Ono's Yakuza. There was a man named Donald Gruber, which is half of Schlickelgruber, which was Adolf Hitler's maiden name, who said I peed with fork prong or something like this. And a Donald Finnegan, which is like fun again. If you knew the social network of vampires in the law field who work for the Seattle Mariners, for example, and Whitehall, you know that Finnegan's wake is exploited. I mean, you're talking to somebody who was a grungy alleyway fugitive from stolen car gangs in East Liberty District, Westminster District, and who would get a $2 used copy of In the Wake of Poseidon and listen to pictures of a city. Imagine how you can titillate him with the fine arts and get him to drop his allegations. Michael Reagan fiendishly tortured somebody from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. The Reagans did not have to do that to me. I didn't know anything about the script of John Lennon when I first started questioning their scruples for the way that they were spitting on the grave of JFK. They certainly started it, dragging the name of liberals through muck, contracting torture. And I just thought if they are behind all of this Nazism from this weird, ironic curtain that has fallen over Pittsburgh, if they are behind it, then my name imprint is going to make them enraged. And sure enough, it made them enraged. They stopped at nothing. Michael Reagan humiliated me, tortured me, murdered bystanders. He got my girlfriend raped. And he did this because he claimed I was framing his father. I was not framing his father. And it may not be able to be established that it was Michael Reagan himself, but if you look at his profile, it certainly corroborates that it was Reagan's regime, Michael Reagan's regime. He calls anybody, he's an Epstein Island ghoul who calls any child who's victimized themselves a pedophile. He said, you were tortured, you abused, and you went on to abuse. And he was talking about a 19-year-old who I was engaged to be married to. How is that a pedophile? And he doesn't even bother to try to reconcile. And the reason is because they pedophiled me, and he gets off. He literally gets off, forcing me to recount these disturbing, morally disturbing, sadistic acts by the Zionist Jews who murdered Roberto Clemente in Pittsburgh towards the grandson of a St. Louis Post-Dispatch writer. And of course, the St. Louis Post-Dispatch are all in and out of Epstein Island all the time. So they're the same sort of Pope mentality. Greg Carl is, I won't go into it too much more. But they were neurobehavioral research trolls who demanded my lunch money. And the NAACP is organized crime, of course. Roberto Clemente liked the poor, but if you look at the way they gassed me in King's Estate, for King's Heavenly Estate, King's Heavenly Estate was where they gassed me, and it was a metaphor for Auschwitz. They used to call the road to the gas chambers the Himmelsweg, or the road to heaven. So this was right across. This was right in the Holocaust. These all of these Jews were Holocaust survivors, and they were laying out all kinds of horrors, just like they are in Gaza, in the city of Pittsburgh. And Martin Ordenberg, the chancellor of the university, was deranged with venoms towards me on behalf of the Yakuza of Yoko Ono. So what they did was they stole back letters they had sent to me. They sent letters to me and accused me of stealing them for trying to read them, because they were secret letters that these people had come up with. Now, the NAACP made a claim that the Green Party, you could see from the ideological trappings of what happened and how they used me, who was responsible for it, and how they made their claim. They used a woman named Rosa Clemente. The 19-year-old was also Rosa. She was from the Green Party. And it was Two Virgins Pussy Bowl, which was named by Yoko Ono and John Lennon. So he was clearly alive somewhere. He clearly pulled a Houdini, because this was all he's doing. He was the main character. The girl who penned the script likeness appears on one of his friends' records in 1979. The Italian futurists came up out of a counterfeiting den called Fayum at the dawn of the era of the great dictators in the Hollywood studio system. They projected into the future, you can control the world as long as you control the media. And, Roberto was never found. McCartney rubbed our faces in it. Never will be found, because they had the Trump on the deck that's claiming that John Lennon was killed. But they never arrested the girl who was involved. And they knew I knew nothing about it, that's for sure, but they arrested me. And thaws of the leveraged Zionist Gestapo of Pittsburgh used to say it was like they had such contempt for Jimmy Carrey. He was like Loki, let's see somebody cry for you. Well, the Fayum people believed that if you controlled media, you could control the world. And so it was like Mount Everest for them, because it's there. We can deceive people as to the whole master storyline of what is and isn't going on in the world. And another character there was Billy Rod. Now, the person who called me was named Russell Bennett. And he had friendship with Billy Rod. He had a hassock, a very spare house. He had a copy of my father's book. He had a hassock, and he had a roller stand for a television set. Billy would sit on the roller stand for the television set, and I would lie on the hassock, and we'd wheel around these big hallways of empty floors in the basement, the downstairs of his strange house on High Park Place. Okay, so if you know that the television magnates came up with the idea of immorality, and the poor deaf boy who's getting whoopee cushion, you understand that Billy Rod was with me when Kasparowski attacked me blindside, and his mother prided herself on having newspapers from the murder of Abraham Lincoln. So why would Mazeroski get involved in this? Well, he had his famous home run 10/13/1960, October 13th, 1960. 1 week later, I was born. And he might have heard about that because my father was very prominent as a professor of education, who no doubt Reagan spat on his grave the way he did on JFK's grave, because he was a liberal. And so I was the wrong kind of pussy ball. They wanted to kick my ass in Pittsburgh. And Miles Kirshner had something he called the too good principle. And something was too good. My father, I was too good. I was going to be at the top of my class if I was given a chance to think, if I was given half a chance. So they deafened me. It was too good. Roberto Clemente was too good. The Jews who killed Roberto Clemente killed him because he was the too good principle.